Good afternoon. I'm Marsh Davis, President of Indiana Landmarks, and it's our pleasure, along with our African American Landmarks Committee, to host this program in response to widespread community interest in the future of Indiana Avenue, and in particular, the proposed development of the 700 block of the Avenue. That's that stretch between the Madam Walker Legacy Center on the southeast and the Urban League to the northwest. A little background as to why Indiana Landmarks is participating in this discussion. For decades, we've celebrated the heritage of Indiana Avenue and have worked to save the fragile vestiges of this once vibrant African-American community. As you can see in this historical marker dedication that Indiana Landmarks sponsored and staged, you'll see to the right of center a very young and severely hip-looking Vop Osili back in the day. That was 1994, believe it or not. Well, that anything remains in that 500 block of Indiana Avenue, for instance, is due to the work of Indiana Landmarks back in the 1980s and 1990s. And beyond the avenue itself, we've invested much time and capital in the preservation and revitalization of Ransom Place, the historic neighborhood immediately to the north of Indiana Avenue and the Walker Legacy Center, as well as in Fayette Street, the historic neighborhood just east of the Walker. Indiana Landmarks holds a seat on the Madam Walker Legacy Center Board of Directors and recognizes this National Historic Landmark as a place of extraordinary importance. Our commitment to Indiana Avenue and its surrounding neighborhoods remains today, no less so than in the past, and that's why we're here. Now, our work, often cited as the two most lamentable losses in our city's heritage, are the English Opera Block on Monument Circle, which was demolished and replaced in the 1940s, and the former Marion County Courthouse, bulldozed in the early 1960s when its exuberant Second Empire style had fallen out of favor. To this pair of most egregious self-inflicted wounds, I would add a third. That is the willful dismantling and destruction of the rich cultural heritage of Indiana Avenue and the adjacent neighborhoods. Here existed a vibrant culture of commerce, housing, cuisine, music, a true community, and a cultural treasure. Tragically, today, most of it is gone. But the place remains, and as the area is redeveloped, as it will and should be, we have, as a community, a collective responsibility to rebuild in a way that respects and honors the heritage of the place and the people who once inhabited it. Such is the intent of this discussion, and it is in that spirit that Indiana Landmarks hosts this program, led by a group of talented architects, designers, historians, and thought leaders, all of whom have committed countless hours of service to the good of our community. This collection of talent and intellect has assembled under the name OG Inc., to be explained presently. But meanwhile, thank you again for joining us this afternoon. It's my pleasure to turn the program over to Claudia Polly, whose international and multifaceted career would take more than the rest of this hour for me to describe. But I know Claudia as a champion of historic preservation at the local, state, and national levels. She co-founded Indiana Landmarks African American Landmarks Committee, and her connection and relationship with the Ransom Place neighborhood and Indiana's African American heritage runs as deep as anyone's, as she is demonstrating now in her present commitment to the future of Indiana Avenue. So Claudia Polly, welcome to the program, and a virtual welcome home to you.
Thank you, Marsh. It's good to be home in Indy once again. And it's a pleasure to work again with my friends at Indiana Landmarks, which is an organization known throughout the country as a leader in historic preservation. It was about 30 years ago that Landmarks and I officially joined hands when what we did in Indiana started a national movement to preserve the places important to African American culture and history. That was an effort that was shared by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which has then led to its creation of the very successful African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. But it all started right in my hometown of Indianapolis. I learned from one of the best in the business about what in 1992 we came to call heritage preservation. You see the map here of the downtown neighborhoods, and Ransom Place, just on the edge of the Miles Square area, right next door to Fayette Street historic neighborhood. And over to the eastern part, you see Lockerbie Square, which is where my mom, Jean Spears, got it all started. I learned from her, really one of the best. She was a true homesteader in Lockerbie Square when she bought her 15-room, single-room occupancy house on Park Avenue for $5,000 in 1971. We, her children, thought she had pretty much lost her mind, but she persevered, and her home became a showpiece for an unwavering preservation vision in Lockerbie Square, and stands today as a monument to the blend of old and new. But after 15 years in Lockerbie, Mom turned her sights to the neighborhood we now know as historic Ransom Place. She went there because that was the place her grandparents, my great-grandparents, had come to in Indianapolis in 1904 when they first came to Indianapolis. The neighborhood that we now know as historic Ransom Place is named for Freeman B. Ransom, the first general manager of the Madam C.J. Walker Company. The late 1800s Queen Anne cottage Mom bought on Camp Street was very much like the ones you see here. In fact, her cottage, just like the one on the left, we think was only standing because the termites were holding hands. Well, she worked hard to make her home a beautiful place, and we still own it today on Camp Street. In 1993, the African American Landmarks Committee worked with Historic Landmarks to then form what we call the Canal Coalition, which saved the sister historic neighborhood of Fayette Street from demolition. Houses were moved and improvements were done, and it too is a proud historic neighborhood in downtown Indianapolis. The neighborhood we call historic Ransom Place, vibrant, respectful, with all services secular and sacred in one area that served Black Indianapolis. That's the Avenue. We've heard of the good time places like Sunset Terrace, but also the Avenue was home to every kind of Black business, including one very respected place that taught a lot of the Black musicians that came to be known around the world as jazz musicians. But they started out at MacArthur Conservatory as classical students. You may not know this, but Freddie Hubbard used to play the violin. Through the years, the Avenue went through hard times because of people moving on up, city neglect, and urban institution avarice. The reason we come to you today, we being OG Inc., and OG, Old Gangsters, is exactly who we are. We've come together because of the development proposed for 719 Indiana Avenue. What we are going to propose to you today is not just dealing with 719 Indiana Avenue, but working with our neighbors, the Church St. Philip's, working with Goodwin Plaza, working with the Indianapolis Urban League, who are all neighbors in that 700 block of Indiana Avenue that we'd like to turn from being empty asphalt into a beautiful place once again, a neighborhood that works with and for the people of its history and the people of its future. The Walker is the most important component existing now today of that history of the Avenue. We think it's a history that should be celebrated and perpetuated long into the future. So what we propose now is that we take a walk through our alternative development plan, which has been done by the extraordinary colleagues you will meet today, and give you a glimpse of what the 700 block of Indiana Avenue can be once again. to tell you more about how this will impact a legacy that she knows and loves and has lived all of her life is Alelia Bundles, journalist, writer. How else should I describe you, Alelia?
Your
Biography,
friend.
girlfriend. Hey, we've known each other for a long time. And most importantly, as we gather here today, the great-granddaughter of Madam C.J. Walker. Alelia?
Thank you very much, Claudia. I'm so glad to have the chance to be a part of this discussion, to affirm my enthusiasm for this vision of what Indiana Avenue could become, and to share some historical perspective on how we got here. As our group has met during the last few months, we began to realize that many people in Indianapolis don't really know why we care so much about this neighborhood, both its heritage and its future. I realized, and we realized, that many others see a blank slate with no value and no worth. What may look like an asphalt desert to people who are driving by on their way to downtown Indianapolis represents for many of us a community where our great-grandparents, grandparents, and parents lived, worshiped, socialized, shopped, went to school, and raised families, and did so when they weren't welcome in other parts of the city. As Madam Walker's great-great-granddaughter and biographer, and as the descendant of African Americans who settled in the Indiana Avenue neighborhood even before Madam Walker arrived in 1910, I have a very personal connection, and I share that affinity with many others. Where others may see concrete and weeds, I see Baird's Cleaners, and I hear the music from Arlene's House of Music. I think about C. Ferguson's bowling alley and childhood birthday parties. I taste the rib tips at Forrest Jones's Barbecue Heaven, Black businesses that allowed families to thrive. I remember arriving at the Walker Building with my mother in her Black 1955 Mercury. I remember riding up the elevator to her fourth floor office and visiting the factory where women hand-packed Walker hair products. But that all began to change in 1958 when the Indianapolis Redevelopment Commission unveiled a master plan that included the construction of I-65 and I-70 and the acquisition of property where IUPUI and the medical center now sit. In the name of progress for Indianapolis, there was a great deal of collateral damage. The heritage of Black Indianapolis was not a priority. What happened here happened in hundreds of communities across America because of federal housing policies, bank practices, and intentional disinvestment. In fact, the Indiana Historical Society, where there's a great exhibit about Madam Walker that I hope you all will go see, has been doing a series on redlining and its impact on our city. Today, the Madam Walker Legacy Center is one of the few buildings still standing from a thriving era. We are grateful that it has survived, but it has had its ups and downs. After decades of deferred maintenance, it has just undergone a $15 million renovation thanks to the Lilly Endowment, which has been a longtime supporter. The Walker never really has had a sustainable business model. The theater is a treasure, but ticket sales alone will never pay all the bills. As a result, the Walker has incurred debt, and it has no endowment. Developing the parking lot next door is a solution to raise needed funds and to create that endowment. As someone who has served on a number of nonprofit boards and educational institutions, I fully understand the need to monetize an asset. And the Walker Center has an urgent need to find a solution. The question is, what will be the long-term impact of the decision and the solution? Our conversation today is meant to be a catalyst to find a way forward that fosters collaboration. We want to see the same care and investment that turned Fountain Square and Massachusetts Avenue, Broad Ripple, and the Circle into desirable destinations. We want the Walker to thrive, but if we are to truly honor Madam Walker's legacy and the legacy of all the ancestors who lived in this community, we need to move forward with a bold and inclusive vision that respects the history, revitalizes Indiana Avenue, embraces input from the community, and boosts economic development. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Olon F. Dotson, Associate Professor of Architecture at the Ball State University College of Architecture and Planning. He also serves on the Indiana Landmarks Board and is chair of Landmarks' African American Landmarks Committee. As a designer and program manager over the last 3 decades, he has led inner city revitalization initiatives throughout Indianapolis and throughout the nation. Among other projects, he has worked on the renovation of Crispus Attucks and the Crispus Attucks Museum, the renovation of the former Arlene's House of Music, which now is the Kurt Vonnegut Center, and the Paca Street redevelopment in Ransom Place. Olon?
Thank you, Lillian. So what we're seeing here are a couple of images. The one on the top is the image that has been presented by the developer that was selected to do this development. And below is a sketch of our alternative vision, and we'll go into more detail. Before I go into detail, I want to talk about a larger vision that's being led by Justin Garrett Moore. He's an Indianapolis native. He's an urban designer, and he serves as executive director of the New York City Public Design Commission. And he also serves as an adjunct professor at Columbia, at Yale, at Tuskegee, and at Morgan State right now. So somewhere in between that, I'm assuming he sleeps, but I don't know. But he has assembled a team of skilled and talented designers to develop a master plan for this district and this corridor, Indiana Avenue corridor. And our plan works within that master plan. So I'm going to turn it over to Justin, and then I'll come back. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Olon, and really to Indiana Landmarks for hosting this important discussion. So here we have two images and two really contrasting ideas and images for what will be the future of Indiana Avenue. One, the proposed Buckingham plan. You can see at the top, something that is out of scale and out of context, has poor design and limited connectivity and inadequate parking, and really an important point, which is limited opportunity for Black spaces in the future of Indiana Avenue. And I'm going to talk about really how we think about an alternative for Indiana Avenue that we can see where we can make a better connection to community, providing for new street and open spaces, simplifying accessibility and parking, and providing for new Black spaces. And so speaking of Black spaces, I wanted to begin and ground some of the work that we've been doing, which crosses many different people and different stakeholders, people young, people old, people who remember Indiana Avenue, people who only kind of know about it from history, that are working to care for this space and to think about its future. But we have to think about why we're doing that work. And a way that we think about this is moving at the speed of trust, for example, when we're thinking about the change for our communities, doing so in a way that takes the time to do things the right way. Planning with and designing with, who do we bring to the table and think about the future in our work planning for our communities. But we also have to think about work to protect and strengthen our culture. We've heard already from previous speakers about the importance of the culture of Indiana Avenue and especially its role as an important space for Indianapolis's Black community, or even nationally for our nation's Black community. And finally, that we want to reckon with the past to build the future. This is an important point that I'll get to in a moment, but we have to meaningfully acknowledge the histories, injustices, innovations, and victories of our spaces and places before we begin new work. And Indiana Avenue is a part of this. And so we recognize that the current proposal is very much connected to the Walker Building, and that the Walker is one of Indy's most important Black spaces. The Walker is only kind of one piece of Indiana Avenue. And in fact, Indiana Avenue, as you can see from this 1929 atlas, wasn't simply the Walker Building and oceans of asphalt parking lots. Indiana Avenue was a community with businesses and schools and homes and community organizations that all together created that important history and culture for the avenue. And the Walker really is kind of one piece of a tapestry of spaces and activities and ideas, and not the only important element. But when we talk about reckoning with the past, in order to think about what we're doing today and in the future, we have to understand what was done in our past. This is a series of aerial images. The Walker is outlined in the red triangle there, where there was this incredibly intact and functional Black community. But over time, what we see what happened is that community was erased and displaced, what James Baldwin calls Negro removal. And there are many different sort of rationales made for this, but one of the most important was for the expansion of the IUPUI campus, for the widening of roads and other kinds of infrastructure. And we see that this space has been erased and leading to sort of the circumstance that we have today, where the Walker is somewhat isolated in its role. But an important kind of point to remember is that this happened in Black communities all across the US, and many communities have been rebuilding their spaces, like 5 Points in Black Denver, or U Street in Black Washington, DC, or of course, Harlem. This is Frederick Douglass Boulevard in New York City, and that we can see a revitalization of our Black spaces. But this is what we have today, which is our kind of core Black space on Indiana Avenue. We've got parking lots. And so we have to think about what are we going to do in the future of these spaces. And so I'm highlighting again this point: plan with, design with. Walk with people as they imagine and realize their own futures. Be connectors, conveners, and collaborators, not representatives. And so work was done to plan with community along Indiana Avenue. In 2005, there was the Indiana Avenue Blueprint, which worked with many different community stakeholders to make Indiana Avenue Cultural District a great place that attracts a diverse population and establishes a vibrant and thriving community. So work had been done to talk about the future of Indiana Avenue. And it was detailed. It talked about creating an energetic African-American cultural, retail, restaurant, and an entertainment hub to preserve and improve cultural assets and welcome and embrace all stakeholders. It also talked about that new buildings and new development should respect and reinforce the character and history of the development of the district. It also said that super blocks, where you kind of get big blocks and buildings that join together and sort of disconnect street grids, really shouldn't be permitted in order to achieve these goals. It even went further, right, with community planning and design consultation to talk about the character and the uses of things like ground floors and the design and detail of buildings to create a pedestrian friendly and high quality environment, right? So this work was done, but this is what we got out of that, right? So plan with, design with didn't happen in this proposal, unfortunately. And while, you know, having a financially viable project for the Walker is important, these other objectives for the community are still important. And it's important to note that we're doing it wrong again. And it's important to note that our Black community deserves better. And so what we've done with a number of different stakeholders is to talk about manifesting the future, to say that Black people, Black culture, and Black spaces exist in the future. And we can design and imagine the future into existence now, and working together to do that. So this past summer, everyone knows there was an incredible show of agency and power and promise with groups like Black Lives Matter, artists, creatives, entrepreneurs, young leaders, old timers, all coming together to claim Indiana Avenue as their Black space, and connecting that to really the claiming of space that is needed, right? These parking lots are not that important in history. So we've worked together to develop what is really an alternative vision and an alternative plan that looks outside of the boundary of only the Walker building. And this is in consultation with Reclaim Indiana Avenue. It's a consortium of people that are local residents and people from across the city that are focused on seeing a better future. And this alternative vision looks at not just the Walker or even the 719 site in the Walker, but how do we get an Indiana Avenue that connects to our city's vibrant downtown and the existing neighborhoods, and that this space can be returned to not just the Walker building by itself, but to create a neighborhood and to create a destination that provides opportunities for success, but also for connectivity to the Urban League, St. Philip's, the Walker, the Indianapolis Cultural Trail, which is shown in brown in this drawing, weaving together the history of Indiana Avenue with our past and our present. And so this is just an overview of what is possible, looking at outside of just the boundary of the 719 site and thinking about how we connect and create a neighborhood amenity really from the canal to the creek up at 10th Street, and creating a corridor with vitality and creating a sense of place where Indiana Avenue can sort of create a kind of a core, a nexus of activity and businesses, creating new connections through the site to link to the canal and the cultural trail, and creating new public spaces and public realm that can be green, that can be programmed, and provide different types of interaction and activity for nearby businesses. So this work is made possible by thinking, again, outside the box and looking at underutilized land that is proximate to the Walker, namely sites to the south, controlled by IUPUI, that are vacant parking lots that have already been imagined for redevelopment, but that could be included in this cohesive and coherent plan for Indiana Avenue's future, but also other sites on the block like the St. Philip's and the Urban League. And finally, connecting this site to the Mile Square in our core of our downtown, and all of the great work that's already been done with the canal, and making sure that Indiana Avenue links and connects to the canal. And so the purpose for doing this, again, is to create space for Indy's Black community to thrive. So we understand that there needs to be new development, new housing, things that are going to generate money for the Walker and for a viable project. But we want to make sure that we're doing that in ways that provides what the Black community in Indianapolis saying they wanted back in 2005, and surprise, surprise, we're still saying that we need it today. Things like space for education and innovation, things like mixed income residential space, new pedestrian space and parking. And so this is just sort of a diagram of all those different types of activities and programs that can be provided here. So the Walker isn't just by itself, that it's connected to a community with different types of spaces, with different populations of people, creating the critical mass to make not only the Walker successful, but to make Indiana Avenue successful and to make Indianapolis successful. And so with that, I'm going to hand things over to Olon, who's going to talk about really what we're thinking about with the 719 site in particular.
Thank you, Justin. Some of what was said today brought back memories, including this image. As I was a student at Shortridge High School in the late 1970s, I remember I was involved in a minority engineering program at Purdue University through IUPUI. And I remember parking in this lot and seeing an old woman on the porch, sweeping off her porch in the middle of the parking lot. And I didn't understand, but I just knew that it wasn't right, that something wasn't right with that. My slides are not advancing. And then I know that the Black community was not silent about this erasure that was going on all around them. So going back and looking closer at the site and looking at the block, the subject block that we're talking about, and we see the kind of network of streets that existed in 1962, and then in 1972 with California Street kind of being the heart of it, leading into the Ransom Place neighborhood. And then, of course, with the senior citizens housing development built, that kind of blocked off California Street. But you do see the cul-de-sac that was created for a rear entrance to the building, and still remnants of the houses that existed all along Indiana Avenue during that time and other structures. And then by 2000, we're starting to look at a sea of asphalt as the Urban League building is under construction and the Walker office building closing off California Street for good. So part of this development, even as proposed by Buckingham, includes the demolition of the Walker office building. But essentially their proposal is just to extrude, almost like a slice of cheese, the development up 4 or 5 stories and maximizing the amount of development that could fit on that site, including the location of Madam Walker's home and residence and foundry on the east side of the development facing what's now Martin Luther King Street. And this is the house that existed at that location. And the proposal as it's been offered has a building, a wing right at the place where her house once stood, where she parked her, what I call a Tesla, her electric car, back around the turn of the century, in her house in the background, and other important institutions in that block as well. So right over here on the east side of the development where the wing is facing Indiana Avenue, you see where the house once was. So I went back and started looking at the site again and looking at the network of streets and trying to think about, is there any feasible way to reintroduce a network of streets in that block to return it to a scale that's more appropriate and consistent with the 2005 master plan that Justin described. And possibly reintroducing California Street was a place to start. Instead of putting a building on the footprint of the Madam Walker house, perhaps a Madam Walker Memorial Boulevard could be introduced as a way to calm traffic off of West Street, which is a superhighway, and minimize 135-degree turns on the Indiana Avenue as you travel south. Also, again, reintroducing California Street, at least a portion of it, as a nice avenue to enter through the development. And of course, preserving and respecting Goodwin Plaza and the roundabout that they have. So this is the master plan that we developed and presented to a few, and including the developer, Buckingham, about 30 days ago, almost 60 days ago now. And this was an early iteration of that, thinking about still development on the site, but scaling it down and breaking it up into something that's more conducive to Black space. And this is an aerial of that. So you see on the east, the Madam Walker Boulevard cutting through and slicing through the development, and the new mixed use, mixed income development and parking. This building, and these are just conceptual designs, as all they are, kind of representative of the type of spaces that we imagine creating. This view of that building on off of Blackford Street with diaspora books and Ujamaa marketplace and other type spaces that facilitate Black space, or even the plaza at California Street, maybe an open space. We can imagine different organizations and institutions that are important to the Black community in this city having an expansive representation in a facility like this. So that is where we were, but we've continued to develop relationships with some of the institutions that surround the site, including the Episcopal Church to the north, and possibly maybe expanding and using that surface parking area. So maybe expanding the proposal to have more parking and more residential leading down California Street to make it more of a street that's conducive to pedestrian corridor, and also development of a cultural center facing Madam Walker Boulevard. So that's what we see there in that kind of parking space coming off of West Street. So this is kind of an early sketch of that was used to develop renderings showing more townhomes and walk-ups as we kind of scale down towards, as we head towards the Ransom Place community, with buildings that are more conducive to the scale of that neighborhood. And on the east side of that garage, if you could imagine a screen, an aluminum screen that has a 3-story representation and a pixelated screen of what existed on that site and how important it is, not only to the site, but to the city. And even having preliminary conversations with the Urban League and the opposite end of the site about introducing a structure that respects the Urban League and its design, but also starts to create space that can support incubator outfits and commercial and retail, separating the space off of the building, and even a gateway to the Ransom community and open spaces for weddings and dinners and lunches and other activities. So again, this is where we are. This is the proposal that we are offering as an alternative proposal to the design that's currently has been presented to the community by the developer. Thank you.
So we come back to everyone. And so this is what we've been working on. This is what we will continue to work on. And this is what we offer as more than just a viable alternative, but a preferable alternative for the development of the 700 block of Indiana Avenue. And we're working on the whole block. We can't piecemeal this block. One, it's too small. And we certainly don't want too large an institution or a building in the middle, which really precludes vitality, vibrancy, people in the rest of the block. And we do not want the Walker building to be left as an aside, if you will. The Walker is very important here. We understand the demands of sustenance and the futuring of the institution, and we are looking at doing what is necessary to make sure that the Walker continues in the way it would like to. Our team, our OG Inc. team, is made up of, as I said, old gangsters, but we have brought in development partners of substantial and national import so that we are able to make our vision a reality. But I jump ahead a bit and I open up the discussion with our folks. And Alelia, I'll try not to call you Lily.
It's okay.
Since we've known
That's
each
a
other
dispensation.
for so long. Alelia, I'll let you take it away because I'm just going to run on.
So, you know, thank you all. I just thought I'm inspired by listening to you. I hope that all of the folks who are listening can see this vision. And we really have to thank Marsh Davis and Indiana Landmarks for providing a platform to allow us to present this vision to a wider audience. All of the things that we have talked about today, we want people to be able to take away something to discuss, to vision, to think about ways that stakeholders can collaborate. And I just think maybe we should just start with Justin, because Justin, you know, all of us grew up in Indianapolis, so we all have this great love of our community. And all of us have lived in other places and we've seen other things, as have many other people. You know, we've seen designs and communities. I'm so glad that you showed 5 Points in Denver. That's where Madam Walker actually started her business before she came to Indianapolis. And U Street, where I live in Washington, D.C., and Harlem, of course, everybody knows Harlem. But we can see what other communities have done to create space. And one of the things that you've talked about in this sort of more holistic vision, both from what Reclaim Indiana Avenue is talking about, and then the need for the walker not to be there all alone. So I hope you would talk about both of those things, about what Reclaim Indiana Avenue has, the consciousness they have raised, and why it's important that the walker not be sort of there by itself.
Thank you. A really important conversation that we want to bring to this dialogue is one that talks about racial and social justice first and foremost. There has been an incredible violence done to the Indiana Avenue community and Indianapolis's Black community with the large scale destruction and erasure of our spaces. We've shared some of those images. And the photos that you all shared in the beginning of that vibrancy and vitality and sense of community is so important. But we also have to understand it wasn't just sense of community and the social cultural stuff. That was our economy, right? That was our sustenance and connectedness and sense of ownership and control and power and self-determination that was connected to this Black space. So we have to talk about space, and to do so in a way that is direct and clear. So the walker has some control of some space that can be used with development to generate some much needed revenue. That is important. Unfortunately, the space is a pretty difficult one. It's sort, you can see in this the image, right, that there's a sort of a triangle, and it's kind of a difficult space to make it work well from a general planning design format. But the reality is that there's a lot of space around here in Indiana Avenue, right? There, you go down there, there are parking lots, a lot of what we call in the urban planning world underutilized space. That also should be on the table in order to recover that sense of community, to recover that kind of energy and connectivity that we had, the intensity of people coming to a place and interacting and exchanging. So the land that's across Indiana Avenue, just to the south, which is controlled by IEPUI, if we put that on the table and say, look, we've had this history of erasure and of taking of land, it's time maybe to return some of that land, right? To put it back into community kind of control, or if not control, at least community visioning, to make sure that we can get a good result for the walker, right? This amount of development all doesn't have to happen on this block. We can have the scale of development that gets the walker the result they need, but we also can get a development that gets the results that people in the community need. Reclaim Indiana Avenue, this sort of incredible coalition of people, and including young people, have been articulating their vision and their future for Indiana Avenue and for their city. And it's important to acknowledge them, right? And the future that they want to see, right? So this visioning process, people have talked about, obviously they want places to live, great. But they've also said that they want places to do business. They want places for history and arts and culture. They want places for entertainment and health and well-being, spaces for sustainability. We can do all of that if we sort of expand our scope and do this work as a community and as a city. And I think that is the main prompt. This isn't the responsibility of only the kind of this little triangle of land. This is a responsibility of the city to do right by our Black community and to see a better result. But I think when we look at other places and what other places have been able to do, it's important to learn from that. You know, I live in right now in Harlem. I'm from Indianapolis, but I live in Harlem. my entire block was erased. There were vacant lots and broken down buildings for blocks and blocks that with time and with a lot of work, we're able to see revitalization of important institutions like the Apollo Theater, and really making sure that the neighborhood developed. You know, yes, there are new people that have come in, but Black people are still here. I live in Harlem. I could tell you, Black people are here, right? And so it is possible. It's not a fiction that you can't have a good outcome. That there are Black people that can exist with new development, with investment, and with vitality.
And in DC, where I am, gentrification obviously is a big topic. There's a new film done by Haile Garima's son about erasure of his neighborhood, of his childhood neighborhood. That's just, I don't know, on Netflix maybe, but that really is looking at the same kinds of conversations that the young folks who are working with Reclaim Indiana Avenue are talking about. You know, you mentioned IUPUI, that this area across the street from the Walker, across the street from the 700 block is being, as a possibility, what could happen, already imagined as mixed use. And there was an incredible conversation that I'm sure many of the people who are listening in heard last week with CICF, where Chancellor Paydar announced that IUPUI would be offering scholarships to the descendants of people who had lived in the neighborhood, and where the Africana Studies Center would now be housed in the Walker Legacy Center, which is in partnership with IUPUI. So we can see that the community is starting to do some work in this direction with collaboration. And Claudia, I know that you have been having many conversations with the neighbors, with the potential partners who could help make this a larger vision. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, certainly we, thanks. And Justin, as an OG, you are now an official OG. It's not a definition by age, but it is a definition by heart, my dear. And there is no history. There's no future without history. And we so agree, and we so thank you for being a part of our group. And there are others that are not on camera or on computer today, but we're a small but mighty group. But we are even better because of our neighbors on this block. And as we say, it is a reach out to the Episcopal Diocese, which has St. Philip's Episcopal Church, which has been on in and around Indiana Avenue. Actually, it sat on the lot just north of Madam Walker's house from its inception in 1898, I believe. And Brendan's going to tell me that it was 10 years before, but we'll say the late 19th century. And so they were there, and they are still there in that beautiful Evans Woolen Design building. They are eager to be part of this block's future. And with Olon showed us the parking garage, which everybody goes, oh God, a parking garage. Well, we're hipper than just a normal parking garage. And this is the 21st century. We can do so much more than what has been done before. But you'll see the proposed cultural center, which is vital to keep alive the history of the place that we're talking about, the place that this all lives. And that would be, I said, 2 or 3 stories. Isn't that right, Olon? We can do that, can't we? I being an old museum person, but facing onto Madam Walker Boulevard. The church is ecstatic about it, and we hope that we can do it. We look at Goodwin Plaza, and our conversations with them is they simply do not want to be looking at the side of a 5-story building, having the sun blocked from a monolith in front of them. So how do we gracefully integrate what we're talking about with what they have, so that the senior citizens who live there are able to enjoy safely and securely the homes that many of them have had for years. And then on the northern end of the block is the Indianapolis Urban League, which would love to have a new development with parking and with places for Black entrepreneurial efforts, which is the whole raison d'etre, the mission of the Indianapolis Urban League. And as you see, it comes to a point there. It's a banner, it's a welcomer. It lets you know you're on the block. And this is a block of history and the future. And our neighbors are ready to go. And as you just spoke of IUPUI, which would be en face on the southern side of the street, we should make it a neighborhood, a complete neighborhood.
So thank you, Claudia. Olin, the design that we must mention Jeffrey Tompkins. We have to talk about this.
Oh, yes.
Beautiful design. But there is so much to be said about the specifics of this design. It's just so welcoming, but it's also so modern with the green roof and all kinds of things aesthetically as well as functionally. Can you just talk a bit about what this design offers?
Well, first of all, it is a cultural district. So I almost see it as a town center within a cultural district. And of course, being a cultural district, it's linked to the cultural trail. So we envision the site as being a cultural trailhead for the Indianapolis Cultural Trail. So a lot of the area that you see highlighted in yellow and orange, gold there in the site is part of the cultural trail. And I imagine that there will be festivals and activities, and it will be a desirable place to be for people from all over the city to come down and experience Black space, experience Black culture, or experience and live in the space. So I think that there's multiple opportunities to do that. As part of the master plan team that Justin has headed up, they're spending more time thinking about what Indiana Avenue itself could be, even just the pavement and how we could perhaps raise it up and create plaza space to improve the connectivity of the site, 719 site, or the triangle site that we've been talking about today, with the sites on the IUPUI campus. So it's just a wonderful space, a wonderful opportunity to celebrate our rich and critically important cultural heritage and heritage conservation, heritage preservation, which goes back to what the Indiana Landmarks, African American Landmarks Committee has in its mission as well.
So I did want to just make sure that you talk a little bit about Jeffrey and some of the detail. And if you would do that, but in working with that, I would love to hear more about some of these references to design. That there are so many little nice touches, lovely touches with the design, rather than something that's that's pretty much a generic building. I mean, there's a lot of thought gone into referencing the heritage, but also having the modern touches, the things that are environmentally interesting.
Yes, I was blessed. I contacted one of my colleagues at Ball State University, Lauren Deeg, a very talented illustrator and designer and urban designer, and asked if he could help represent some of my thoughts about this site and our thoughts as a team. And he was pretty tied up, and he said, I recommend this student, Jeffrey Tompkins. And so we discovered Jeffrey, and I was able to just sketch some ideas, and he took it to this level in a very short period of time. Pretty amazing. And so I am crediting Jeffrey with these images, and these images are copyrighted in the lower right-hand corners. You can see Jeffrey Tompkins. I asked him to put that on there. Very modest young man who probably wouldn't have done it if I didn't ask him to. So all these renderings, and there's more to come to really capture the kind of character of the space that we're trying to create, including cooperative urban grocery stores. We have anyone on this line affiliated with KEFRU. I think about Malik Yakini and what he's trying to do with the People's Grocery Store in Detroit through the Black Food Security Network. And that's the kind of space that we're imagining on the retail level as well.
Yeah, I quickly, and Olon, if you don't mind going to the overview image, I also want to acknowledge the work of a number of different designers that we've had working with, of course, Olon and Jeffrey, but also Atelier Corey Henry, an Black architect, Chase Merritt, which is a really great landscape architecture firm in Indianapolis, that has helped with some of these visualizations. And it was important that we're working across disciplines to see this vision through. So urban planners, urban designers, architects, landscape architects, people that have worked with all the things that it takes to create a good space. And so sustainability elements, public space, public realm are just as important as the buildings, right? A community is its spaces, and spaces also include our public realm. And so I just wanted to also acknowledge all of their hard work from what's really a whole team. This is a coalition of people kind of working together to see a better vision for Indiana Avenue.
So we have just a couple of more minutes before I'm going to turn it back to Claudia. But I'm just wondering, I think we all got involved in this because we really see an opportunity to, give some love to our hometown and to really lift up our community. And we know that so much of what we remember as young people is lost. It's not going to be there for children and grandchildren, but we want the next generation to be able to have some pride in the community, but also for others to come visit Indiana Avenue, for it to truly be a destination that is something that people from all over the country and all over the world want to be a part of. So I'm just wondering, before we go back to Claudia, thoughts, Olon, Claudia, Justin, that you have about why this is important?
It's our future. It's our future we have in our hands. And if we don't do it correctly, then it will be so much less for our children and grandchildren. And we're of the age where we have children and grandchildren. And when we take them home, we'd like for them to see the best of our city, of our community, of our neighborhood. And this is but one block that we're looking at. Justin and his band of brilliant minds are working on a whole master plan. But on this one block, we have an opportunity to give back to the people who brought us forward. And I think that's why we're here.
I was so moved to see the picture of Jean Spears earlier in this presentation, and I remember her as if it was yesterday. And I left Indianapolis with my mother, Norma Dotson, to move to Tulsa, her home, and I lived part of my childhood in Tulsa. And people ask me, can you imagine if there'll ever be another Black Wall Street like what existed in Tulsa in the 1920s? And I had family that grew up on that street and that thrived on that street. And I said, no, not as it was, because that would essentially require a form of institutional segregation that forced our hand to survive and make a way out of no way. But what I can imagine is that we can have space that we can celebrate our history and our heritage and reintroduce it in a contemporary way in the 21st century. It's something that our children can be proud of, a place for them all to come.
Thank you. Justin, anything before Claudia closes us out?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I too have connections. My would have been great grandfather lived at 427 Agnes Street, which is gone. Right, Kavanaugh Hall sits on it. And when I was a kid, my mom had her office in the Walker Building, and we would go visit. And so I'm very much connected to this place. It's still my home. It's still my space as well. But I also have a lot of different hats. One of my hats is, not to sound arrogant, but I'm one of the top urban designers in the country. Right? I'm in charge of urban design for New York City's public realm. right? It's not an easy thing to do. And so I've got some experience, and I know that this proposed direction that the current plan is going in is the equivalent of malpractice and bordering on unethical. There's so much has happened, to this space, and there is a responsibility for all the different decision makers, and especially for people that are in some form of agency or power or decision-making power, with responsibility to the public to make sure that we don't have a bad result for this community that has already had so much harm done to it. It needs to stop. This is the time for it to stop. And a very professional urban design opinion is that a big mega building on this particular block creates further irreparable damage to having a viable outcome for this corridor. This is just really blunt, but I have to say it clearly.
Thank you,
And I
Justin.
just hope people really understand that it's not just another building.
Thank you.
Amen.
Claudia?
Well, there's not much more that we can say, except for the fact that we are very much in support of Madam Walker Legacy Center and their positive future. What we are envisioning, what we propose, we have brought together a group of people, not just us on this call, but people who stand with us, ready to help us develop and help us create and develop what we've been talking about, bringing it to life from start to finish. And we're just asking for the opportunity to make that real. So make your voice heard. If you're on this call, please make your voice heard. Contact Vop Osili, that ever hip young man you saw in the African-American landmarks picture at the beginning of this presentation, and Jeff Bennett, who is almost as hip. Jeff. So, but please email them, let them know you liked what you saw, or you think we're absolutely crazy, but we hope that you liked what you saw. And then if you'd like to reach us, please reach out to us through Indiana Landmarks. But we'd love to thank you for joining with us today, for taking an hour and 2 minutes out of your early evening, and thank you.